family homes plus garage. So if you had a 900 square foot single bed apartment, and then yes, you can make the density work with commercial use. Most communities where you see it are probably closer to 25 units an acre when they're doing a mixed use development. They're pretty intense. They're putting storefronts, retail on the bottom, and typical apartments on top. It probably doesn't go beyond the density that we currently allow. So we could consider new zones that go beyond what we currently have.
So based upon what you just said, in order to do that, to do a mixed use area, to develop a mixed use area, it would have to be on a reasonable request, and they'd have to create an ordinance for that, right?
Yeah, so we have pretty clear within ordinances, you're either commercial or residential. There are some provisions, and I've been looking over our central commercial district in particular that actually allow for some single family, but it's far from clear on how much, what that looks like. And so my take is, yes, if we want to allow it, we need to create an ordinance that accommodates it, and then select where that would be permitted.
And so within this general plan amendment, a mixed use ordinance allowing high density would be okay, even though it says up to X amount of units per acre.
And so the market may push back on it with it. Perhaps that's some of the homework we can do for you, is reach out a little bit to the development community. What does it take to make mixed use work? I wish I could say I have more effort on it. I have been part of some projects, but my understanding from the development community is if commercial works at a location, mixed use can't. But if commercial wasn't going to work to begin with, mixed use is very difficult. And so adding rooftops and customers to support those is crucial. So that's where the high densities come into play, is if they weren't there to begin with, to have enough demographic and spending power. Commissioner Ryan will have some in on this. It wouldn't work. So Kaysville's mixed use could be unique to us, and it may work, but we could do some more homework on that.
So just looking at projects around the county and in Salt Lake County, you typically have to have retail, but then you have the rooftops. There's three elements that usually play into it. You have transit, retail, and then the housing. So without those three elements, typically a project won't work. And so you've got to have, like it says, rooftops to support the retail, and then typically there's a transit. So go over to Layton and look at right next to Layton Parkway. They have that building there. They built that with less than 0.85 parking spaces. So usually you build an apartment building with 2 parking spaces. They build with 0.85. So less than 1 parking space per unit there. And it's very successful because it's on the transit line. And then you have the retail that's all very close. They can access very rapidly. And so the other one that you look at is down at Sugar House Park, down on 11th East and 21st South. That's very successful also, but it's on a transit line. The majority of the people that live there work between 106 South and Utah County. They all take the train down. And so they built that one also with less than, I think, 0.75 parking spaces per unit. So you have to get that mix right, and you have to get the transit with it too. So it is a mix. Working in that space with developers, you have to figure out the right project, right place, and the right elements there. It can work and work well with the cities and the population. And it also depends on what you want to attract to your city.
And maybe a direction we could take, commissioners, for super specific in the general plan that may hurt us moving forward when we find out, yeah, we need 15, 20, 30, I don't know what the number would be. So I know the direction of the past has been, our general plan is so brief, it's so generic, probably to a detriment, but you can look at so many ways. So you're playing the balance of how specific do you get that you can't be flexible, or how generic do you leave it so that you can. And we can amend these and change these, it's doable. Ultimately, it comes down to our ordinances and how they reflect this. And so if you give at least clear guidance on those ordinances become, find the balance, and we look to you, and I appreciate your participation on it to strike the right point.
So this is a good discussion. And
I think it's probably mostly applicable to when we do our bigger overhaul for the general plan. So let me try to bring us back to what this amendment is about and the red lines that we have in the packet. So I'll just start. We've already touched on it a little bit, but what are your thoughts on the red lines to, I guess, section 1 housing, where it's saying, as a general rule, 0 to 4 units per acre instead of 2, up to 10 units per acre along major streets, and then on the east side up to 16 units. Those are just proposed numbers. We don't have to stay with those. We can go up or down. Is there any specific comments about that or reactions to that?
I think, is having been through general plan revision for another county, these need to be updated occasionally. Need to change in communities. And I think it's good to go through and look at this to see where you have to be. And statutorily, we've got to move the ball. I think, as a city, we've got to take a look at this. I think the work that Lyle's done and what we've done, we've kind of got to feel for what the citizens want. I think it's kind of the direction we're going to have to move because of SB 34. But I think it's a good place to start. I like the numbers. I think it's within a fair balance of what needs to happen.
There are other thoughts? Yeah, I mean, I suppose putting numbers in is not inherently bad, but like Lyle said, it limits us. If for some reason we wanted to, for example, go more than 10 units, more than 16 units, or someone who's opposed to that would be wanting to say, no, it should be a lot less. Which, by the way, now is the time to make that argument. But we have critics out there. But nevertheless, we can keep numbers, we can change numbers. It just do pigeonhole us a little bit. Okay, so other red lines we saw in terms of just general reactions. Transportation plan is just, we have this great transportation plan, active transportation plan, that we just, whatever the word created. So we can incorporate that and say, let's start implementing the strategies that came from that plan. I don't know if that seems pretty logical, but is there other discussion on that point? Okay, all you people, listen. Pretty clear. Okay. Well, thank you for the comment. Okay, we'll try to.
Okay, is this better? Okay, sorry. Okay, so I have a comment not about the active transportation plan, but I had someone ask me, they said, okay, you're revamping the general plan as the city. Can you guarantee that, can you set the process to make sure that the housing is affordable? And I said, no, we can't do that. The only way, I guess, the city can really do that is to allow a builder or developer to build higher density, right? Because it's not that we want that, I'm not saying we do, but in order to meet those goals, because what we're seeing is moderate housing coming in at really expensive prices. So that's just a question that someone asked me, and I thought it was a good point.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just offer my thoughts. We have to, what I think SB 34 is driving at is we need to create an environment where quote-unquote affordable housing can come. We don't get to dictate that kind of stuff, but we can create the situation where it's more likely to occur. And I think, in my own personal opinion, we need to be better at that in Kaysville. And we've had opportunities recently that I think we haven't taken the best advantage of. And there's two sides to that argument. I understand that's my side. So this is kind of trying to force us to, in the legislature, to make those changes as best we can in our local context.
you proposed 3 of the multiple criteria that you just plugged in based on the comments that we've had here, and then from the citizens we've heard at the open houses, these are the 3 that you picked, right?
Correct. So, you'd be welcome to add more, and you may argue that we could remove one if some of the prior language accommodated one of those options already.
So just to be clear, we're saying accessory dwelling units, creating that as a goal, higher density, and possibly mixed use zones, high density in mixed and the mixed use zone and near commercial zone centers, employment centers, and preserve existing moderate income housing. I think we can meet that last one. Again, this maybe we're not done with this discussion, but this notion of affordability or moderate income, I guess, is the better approach. But affordable housing is relative because, as these recent examples that I'm talking about, I think price points were going to be like mid 300s, and that's now what's affordable in Kaysville. So it is a relative term. We're only going to be able to try to foster so much of an environment to bring the prices or the affordability down, short of doing more drastic things like incentivizing or subsidizing development or housing, which I don't think we talk about very much. But if you don't do that, you're only going to be able to get the prices so low. Any other discussion on?
Thank you. So it kind of goes back to what you were saying before, which was, do we put in numbers, but then these potential side effects of that is pitching ourselves. But it sounds like I'm tough with what you're saying, which is we want affordable housing. How do we define affordable housing? Is it 200? Is it the 300? Maybe not. If it were the 200, that would be great. But then I think it goes back to, if that's our goal, what's it going to take for the developer? What's the density? And we've heard in the past, okay, if you allow me to do this, it's going to take so many units. Here's the price. We've heard that. So maybe it goes back to what you're saying about these numbers that we're putting in. We should be cognizant of market forces.
Okay. Well, I think we'll revisit this discussion. And is there any other opportunities for public input, Lyle?
You're welcome to encourage it. We've met the statutory requirement as far as the public hearing. But yes, so it will be all of that public meetings. If you would like us work such an agenda so the public knows, or additional outreach, they're welcome to continue involved in that way. You're sure welcome to do that. You can always go above and beyond the amount of comments you're receiving above the minimum. If you think something outside of the meeting is still necessary, we can discuss that as well and find other ways to collect information if you feel that's appropriate.
Okay.
Last comment on this. So what you're saying is, if we wanted to engage the public a little bit more on this issue, because I'd really like to know what people think. I really would. I mean, I kind of know what I think, but I'd like to know how people actually feel. I know nobody wants affordable housing next door. I get that. But so are you saying that we'd have open houses or another public hearing, or what are you saying that we could do to?
Well, I think you could. So the time constraint we have will be a little bit limited on how much we can do. So I don't know for certain that the city council is going to adapt it the first time they see it. I mean, if we've done a good job of really thinking it through, they may. So that's where I'm hoping in November to do it. They're often out now. Holidays and such during the month of December, there aren't always very many meetings to get it done. So we do have this time constraint where the state's saying by the end of by December 30th, I believe it is 2019. It might even be December 1st, actually. 2019, we should have something adopted. So that said, we can continue. We've done one open house already. We've done online surveys and outreach, and we've been kind of engaging the waters with the strategic planning process a little bit. We talk about housing with people. But yeah, we're welcome to do more than that. We can have more hearings here with the Planning Commission. We'll take your direction. Just know we're within that time constraint. additional information. And even as much as this has need for revision, we've been every 5 years, 3 to 5 years or so, the city does do it. And so we will constantly see changes to this where we don't always get it right the first time. We can continue on it. Just so happens this go around, we know right on the tail end of this, we're going to be right back in this conversation.
Okay, let's go to our next agenda item, which is, I believe, a preliminary plat, public hearing and preliminary plat for the Green Manor subdivision. Oh, sorry, conditional use permit. Okay, thank you for directing me. Okay, rewind. Conditional use permit for a two-family dwelling at 188 North 650 East with Dustin Parker. Wow.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm just going to look at one note that I know many of the public who are here this evening are here for this item. And I just wanted to check on a square footage, and I will stand over there and hopefully speak to them. Okay. So I think many are here for this. So the property here on the corner of where we're at 5th, 6th East, 5th and 200 North. It's actually 650 East, right on the corner. That's an existing single-family dwelling. The owner of it has expressed interest in converting it to a two-family dwelling. So in the existing zoning designation, it's primarily single-family dwellings by permitted use. However, it does allow for two-family dwellings as a conditional use, thus they're here before the Planning Commission this evening. The way it reads is so long as there are not more than 2 additional duplexes within 500 feet of this duplex. And so what this map indicates is the location of that. We've looked in our records within a 500-foot radius for additional legal duplexes of record or twin home, whatever configuration. It appears that there are only the 2, so this could be permitted as the 3rd. What the property owner is proposing to do, I'm trying to recognize faces, I don't know if he's here this evening, is essentially it's a basement apartment or basement unit. So they've got the 1 unit upstairs. They're hoping to do some construction and remodel on the bottom floor. It's about 960 square feet of space. They would have a stairwell on the east side or the back of the home for access into it, and proposing a driveway on the north side of the property so that residents in 1 unit could park on one side and residents in the other unit could park on the south side. It's about the detail that you have. It's a city street. As far as the drive access here, it's not highly detailed, but we believe, and there's a note in there, we would keep them at least a minimum distance from the intersection, and I think they can meet that and provide an appropriate driveway. Typically, we have 2 parking spaces per unit, and so these would be long enough that you could meet at least that minimum standard. As the conditional use permit, just as a reminder for the commission, again, it's a use that we've, within our ordinance specified, is permitted. However, you're looking to see if there are any detrimental impacts that you can mitigate that require additional conditions. Often we see traffic as one of those. There may be others that you find are necessary to pose specific requirements on this in order to mitigate those impacts. And, we find often it's not eliminate, but mitigate, I think, is a key word there that comes out of statute and within our ordinances. And you can look at the standards within that. It's not technically a public hearing, but I'm aware that there are several neighbors who may have some comments of interest for the Planning Commission should you choose to entertain that. And I'd be happy to take any questions myself as well. But we'll turn it back to you, Commissioner Sunlaw, for the floor.
Okay, so like Lyle said, this is not a public hearing. However, if we are looking at imposing conditions, I think, at least I'll speak on behalf of myself, it's nice to sometimes hear from, neighbors that can tell us things that maybe we're not aware of. So if you're here to talk about this, come up and we'll try to keep your comments brief, but tell us your questions or comments with respect to this conditional use permit. But before we do that, maybe, Lyle, I don't know if this being my maiden voyage, although I've been here for a lot of meetings, should we give the applicant an opportunity to maybe address things, or do we usually hear from people first?
Yeah, and I think, while we haven't officially passed the new bylaws, Mr. Summercorn, the current chair, I think is interested in that format. It may answer several questions that the neighbor have to solicit that information from the applicant, let the public speak, and then we'll often let them come back up to address concerns that they're likely more privy to than even we are as staff.
Yeah. So let's do that. So Mr. Parker, if he's here, come up and maybe address what Lyle said and maybe give us some more background. Then we'll hear from the neighbors, and then if we need to have more questions for the applicant, we can go from there. Is he here? Okay, so that makes it easy. Okay, so if anyone is here to comment on this, come up, state your name, and tell us your comments or questions.
Is this on? Okay, one of the questions I have...
What's your name?
Dale Maxfield. I live in the Circle. One of the questions I have, if this does pass, is he able to put another duplex on it? I'm hearing rumors that was his intention, is after he changes this, he wants to put another duplex on that property.
Well, I think I can answer that, or Lyle can. So my understanding is this is not what might be a rezone that would maybe allow something like that. This is the current zoning, and the zoning's not changing. It's asking for a conditional use under the current zone. So if this were granted, then he would only be able to do the 2 units here and no more. Lyle, you can correct me.
Does he have to live in the house, or can he rent both units out?
Yeah, I'll speak to both of those. So under the existing zoning, let everybody hear, hopefully. So under the existing zoning, they would not be able to do an additional duplex on the property. They may be able to subdivide it. I'm not certain on that with the square footage, but only a single-family home would be permitted within the existing zoning. So because it limits no more than 3 duplexes within 500 feet, under that zone, even if you were to do a new building, this becomes the 3rd duplex in that area, and there would not be others permitted. As far as occupancy of it, whether they live there and rent out the basement or they rent both upstairs and downstairs, we don't determine that. They're allowed to do either scenario. It could be a completely rental unit or owner-occupied in at least half.
My biggest concern is I've spent a lot of money in the last 5 years on my house, bringing my value up and doing a lot of renovation to that, and doing a duplex at the end of that deal and not controlling what is in there or who's in there will change the value of the house. The safety of the circle will change, all of it. It will. There's no way to look at that different. It just will change. It is a very safe, very secured neighborhood. We all know each other. We all watch each other's stuff. And if you bring in people that are renting, it just changes everybody's feel of what that property is. Nobody takes care of it like a homeowner.
My name is Grant Biesinger. I live in the cul-de-sac. So a question, I've heard or been told that if you have a basement apartment and you put that in for a mother or a close relative of that sort, that is automatically grandfathered in as a legal duplex. Can you speak to that?
I'll address that. So any home in Kaysville City that's a single-family designation can have a single family living in it, and the city's definition of that is anyone who's related by blood, marriage, adoption, guardianship. So it wouldn't necessarily be grandfathered, it's just simply permitted citywide. So if they are your family that's in that basement, then they're permitted there. Some people will have that with a separate entrance or second kitchen. Sometimes it'll just, it's a typical house with one kitchen and one entrance, but they kind of live there as family. Yeah, there are all kinds of ways that you can divide up the actual structure, but so long as they're family, any one of these homes on this map and in the city could have a related mother-in-law scenario within it.
So does that affect the number of duplexes allowed in that 500-foot radius from the home or not?
It would not, because we do not consider those two-family dwellings. It's still only a single-family designation.
Okay. So in the agenda that was sent out for this, that was part of the city standards were quoted, 1738, and it's talking about that it must provide a use of the location that is necessary or desirable service that's got to contribute to the general well-being of the community and the neighborhood without effects on the health, safety, or general welfare of persons residing or working in the vicinity or injurious to property or improvements in the vicinity. So, you know, I'm just going to kind of second what Dale has said on that with this rental property. You know, what guarantees are there and what kind of qualifications does the applicant have to be able to properly manage a rental property that will be maintained, that is desirable, and how do you define whether that is desirable or not? You know, certainly I think the residents that are in the vicinity, everybody that I've spoken to does not consider it desirable as called out in the standards, nor do we think that it contributes to the general well-being of the community, and it definitely detracts from Utah's hometown as we know ourselves. So, you know, it'll be my recommendation that before any approvals are given on that, that Planning Commission look very closely at that standard that's quoted to us in the minutes or in the agenda that was given to us. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Marilyn Kilpack, and I live 2 homes away from the corner. Anyway, 164 North 650 East. I oppose the conditional use permit for a 2-family dwelling because decreased property values, increased traffic in our cul-de-sac, lack of adequate parking, decreased safety for children in our cul-de-sac. There are 10 homes in the cul-de-sac with 11 children or youth, 3 youth 16 years or under, 8 children under the age of 5 years. Of the 10 homes, 8 have been in their family for 30, 50, or 55 years. So, anyway, we're invested. These families take pride in our neighborhood. There are 4 homes that have mothers, mother-in-laws, or family that live or have lived with them in their home. There are obvious safety issues with the 188 North 650 East location. Parking will be too close to the corner. Stop sign is right there. I don't know if that would have to be moved. There's a fire hydrant right there. I don't know if the water or the water pressure would be impacted if they put the driveway on that north side of the house. Snow removal. Those are just a few of the safety concerns. Temporary renters are normally not as invested in the property. Drive around and look at some of the rental properties in the area. Just even on Second North where you're coming, there's quite a few. They're all overgrown. Not all of them, but quite a few. We don't want our corner to be like that. This permit would have a negative impact on every family or home in our cul-de-sac except one. This permit would also impact people from nearby neighborhoods that choose to walk their children in the cul-de-sac. A duplex or set of duplexes, which we've heard that would be what you want to do down the road or whenever. You have to get different permission, but it would not be very welcoming to our neighborhood. I would invite you to drive through our cul-de-sac at 650 East 2nd North. Just get a feel for it, and you'll know why it's so important to us. And I don't know if any of you would really want to have a duplex right next to home.
My name's Kevin Collier, and I live across the street on the north side of 2nd North. And my concern is about safety. This is, I consider, a very dangerous street. We have several hundred 18-wheelers a day going up and down this street. It's on a curve, and you can actually only see about 50 yards in either direction. And this property is not fenced. I just don't think it would be a suitable place for young families with children. That's my comment. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Heidi Naylor. I live at 153 North 650 East. I was born in that house, so I'm one of the longer-term residents there. My parents bought it. I was born there less than 6 months later. I lived my life on that street. I've raised kids on that street. I have put money into that property as my financial investment for the future. And I am very concerned with property values. I've lived other places. My mom has always lived there until she passed. But I've lived other places, and I've seen what happens to property value when you start putting multifamily dwellings in the area. Families that typically live there are not as invested in the community or the property. They're renters. They come and go. And with the rental prices in Kaysville, they would probably come and go faster because they're just looking to get into their own homes. That concerns me because it's a very safe neighborhood now. We are off the beaten path. That is a very long cul-de-sac. We used to call it the keyhole. That was the term for our cul-de-sac, and some of us longevity owners still use it. You can't really see what's in that street from 2nd North or really anywhere else. It's very safe. We all know each other. We watch each other's property. We make sure each other's children are safe. And it's really hard to think of the turnover that you have and not knowing what's going to come in. And I know you can't always prevent that, but there are a lot of things that state care community-wise as far as I'm concerned. And my financial investment is a concern for me as well. Those are my main concerns.
Just a couple quick questions as well. Again, Grant Biesinger. I'm glad you changed that picture there. I guess first, thank you for being willing to hear us tonight, even though it's not a public hearing. I appreciate that. The question has to do with the sidewalk. You know, safety's been brought up a few different times. As you can see in the picture, the sidewalk ends where that proposed driveway is at. If this were to pass, would that sidewalk, I mean, as far as safety for travel along 2nd North, you can see there's nothing on 2nd North for that, and nothing all the way along that side of the street. So, I mean, is there any recommendations or requirements for them at that point to continue the sidewalk along the north side of the house? And how would that affect the amount of property they have to be able to divide that up? So, I don't know. Do that for us real quick.
So to the sidewalk question, typically what will happen as far as development for a subdivision process, this lot we're splitting and a new structure will be put on there. We would have through a subdivision process a requirement for the street improvement and the sidewalk. You'll see some of that with the other subdivision process this evening. So there's some processes where it's very clear, absolutely would be required to put that in. In this case, it would, because they're not further developing the property, they're getting a conditional use permit for an extra unit. It would only be under a circumstance where the Planning Commission finds a nexus and deems that necessary to mitigate impacts from the impact of this proposal. So it could be a requirement of the Planning Commission if you find that necessitates it. Otherwise, it's not an outright requirement just based on their question.
Okay, thank you. I know that several of us have
with respect to letters and comments before this meeting probably was the time. So if there's content in those letters or things that hasn't been said, now is the time.
Sorry, my name's Marilyn Kilpack, and I was going to say that as far as I believe the public notice showed up in front of their house last Friday the 20th, and I called on Friday, left a message, and so I received a call back Tuesday morning. So we really haven't had a whole lot of time to try to get all of our thoughts and everything together, but if we need to get signatures, we're there. We have a form, but just have and all that.
I'm Kenneth Nita. I was right next door to this owner. Over the time he's lived there, the condition of the property has dropped. Overgrown lawn, or sprinklers flooding my house, hitting my garage, damage to my vehicle from his roofing. He failed to secure. And again, he damaged my car. You can see pictures, silhouette of his truck in the side of my Z car, showing where he left his truck for a year in license because it didn't run, killing the grass. So his idea of parking the street in the wintertime is in the lawn. And again, overgrown grass, cutting things down, not taking care of the property. It doesn't get any better. These are his current instructions, but debris in his driveway, a dead dryer in the backyard in mud, and just illustrated items everywhere. It's just a hole. And again, you can even see where it's dead. I don't see it improving anymore. Even if you get a permit, it's not going to be there to take care of it. And it'll go downhill. I own that property, adjacent property. My family's in. I don't want him developing it any more than yet. Single family dwelling. Simple. Have a nice.
Thank you again for hearing us. I live right next door on 74 North 650 East. My name is Becky Needham. I've lived there for over 17 years. When I first moved in that house, I was single. The neighborhood was very safe. I felt safe. I never worried about being by myself. I was never concerned about safety. I think if that was turned into a rental property and you're renting out both units, there's going to be more crime in the area, and people that are moving in and out are not going to be as careful or take care or have pride in the area. And I think the safety of all the children in the neighborhood will be at stake. We actually like the neighborhood so well, we moved my mother and father in next door to us because the neighborhood that they've been living in was going downhill because of renters. Garbage in yards, crime. So we just don't want to see that happen here in this neighborhood. It's a great neighborhood, and these people are great to have as neighbors. Thank you.
My name is Karen Maxwell, and I also live in the circle, and it is a wonderful, safe place to live right now. We have had rentals, and when you're not invested in the property, you don't take care of the property, and we have had several people that we thought would be wonderful to take care of our place, and at the time we George, my daughter lived around the corner, and if it hadn't been for her, our yard would have been dead. The lightning struck a tree and busted a huge limb off of it. They wouldn't even take the limb off of the property, she had to come up and try and drag it off. The house wasn't taken care of when we came back and had them leave. We had to almost sandblast the bathroom shower because it hadn't been taken care of. Everything that they had done in the kitchen, it was drawing bugs because it didn't take care of the dishes. But I feel like almost have to have somebody there because there's a lot of renters that probably do, but there's also a lot of renters that they don't have money invested, they don't have family invested in there, and they let it go, and they don't care. And if this family that's in there now moves and has 2 renters in there, they're not taking care of the yard and everything else. What's going to happen when they get 2 renters in there that aren't invested in the property with the values of our home, with the safety of these little children, the people that live next door to us, and those little kids are safe at the end of that cul-de-sac. But with renters that are coming and going, there's going to be at least probably 4 cars. They don't have parking for 4 cars, so they're going to be parking in front of our home. And you know how children are. They dart in front of cars. They don't understand. They're too young. We watch out for them. So I just hate to see the value and the safety of our little circle. So nobody's here to even go for him. Not even he is here. And he hasn't been great with anybody letting us know what's going on with his home. That is very bad for me. Thank you.
My name is Chris Titus. I'm here representing my parents, Barry and Carol Avery, who are residents of the cul-de-sac. My family moved into that cul-de-sac when I was 5 years old. My 90-plus-year-old parents still live there. I'm in my 60s, so obviously I've been personally involved in this neighborhood for a very, very long time. And I want to thank, from the bottom of my heart, the current residents who cared enough to show up tonight. And when they say they look out for each other, they aren't kidding, because my 90-year-old parents wouldn't be alive at 90 years old without a lot of these good people sitting right here. The neighborhood is a great one. All anybody wants to do is make sure it stays that way. Safety is a huge issue, and I would respectfully request that at the very least a 2-scale drawing of what this plan really is be shown, because the way it appears now, there's going to be a driveway allowed to park. This is a problem. So there are very, very valid safety concerns. The property value issues are real. I think it's safe, and clearly we all share these same concerns because you're hearing them over and over. I think it's safe for me to speak for all of these good people in saying we all agree there is an appropriate place and an appropriate need for multifamily dwellings. But a 60-plus-year-old cul-de-sac of single-family dwellings is not one of those places. It just isn't. And I think if you kind of put yourself in the position that we're in right now, and it was happening next door to you, or your aging parent, or someone you love, I think you'd really take a hard look at whether or not that was something that would in any way bad quality, to where you request that you consider that although you probably, or not probably, you absolutely have the legal right to grant this permit, it doesn't necessarily make it the right thing to do. And I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? So I appreciate the comments and things that are said, gives us good context. So open it up to discussion or questions from the commission. Can I actually let me just say something, and I should have done this. So the conditional use permit. Actually, let's back up. So every zone, every residential zone, or commercial or otherwise, in Kaysville has permitted uses that are just listed out. There are things that you can do, types of land use in every zone that you can do without anybody looking over your shoulder, including the city. And then there are conditional uses in every zone. And conditional uses are essentially permitted uses that have impacts beyond regular permitted uses. And so a conditional use says, look, these uses are uses that we are prepared to allow in this zone, but we are going to have the opportunity as a city to impose conditions to address the negative impacts that might come from those uses. So what that really means is we as a commission don't have a whole lot of discretion. We have a little bit of discretion. This is not something like a rezone application where it's totally a legislative decision, and that means we get to do whatever we feel is best. This is not that situation. This is a situation where the decision in many ways has already been made for us. The only discretion that we have is we have to say, what are the negative impacts that come from this, if there are any, and then what can we do to address those impacts? If we can impose conditions to address those impacts, then we, by law, have to approve this. We don't get the decision to deny it. Does that make sense? So that is the context of our discussion, and so many of the things that you said, we might agree with personally, or maybe we don't. I don't know, but some of the things that were said are valid concerns, but they are in many ways outside the scope of our discretion. So I'll just preface that and let the discussion happen.
What is the ordinance as far as like how far the setback of is that the red where they're proposing to put the driveway, additional parking?
So the question is, what the ordinance is as far as setback distance requirements for the property line. What the ordinance requires is that from where the property intersects, and you can see a little bit of this drawing, it's not a true square. And so what we end up doing is just bringing those lines out further to where they would intersect, and 20 feet from that point is the closest point that a drive approach is permitted. I was checking based on the comment that was brought up from the neighbor. It looks like the stop sign sits right there at the end of the sidewalk. So hopefully what that does is allow for the length of one vehicle to stand, the passenger vehicle to pull up to a stop sign. Somebody could still get in and out of their driveway behind that. Is more or less the basis behind that standard. Correct, the drawing is not to scale, so I don't know exactly where the driveway would sit in relation to that, but the structure itself is roughly 20 feet off of the property line to begin with, so they may have to jog their driveway to accommodate that, but I believe there are ways that they can get the private approach outside of the 20 feet.
Okay, I have a question. So in the description it says the applicant is requesting approval to build a new two-family dwelling at the address. So if it's a new two-family dwelling, I'm just curious as to why it's not a rezone request.
Perhaps the semantics are confusing there. So they're not proposing to raise the structure and build a completely new building on site. They're simply looking to work on the basement to add an extra unit, is my understanding. The reason the rezone is not required is because the current zoning allows it. We call it a new one because right now it's considered a single-family dwelling. So by changing it, it's now a new two-family dwelling in this area. Hopefully that clarifies it. But again, the rezone is not necessary because the current zone permits it. A rezone would be necessary to do more than one duplex or something of that nature on the property. Sounds like is an idea that's been heard by the community.
Okay, so then my next question is, since it's a conditional use permit, and then it says the applicant is looking to remodel. So since it's a conditional use permit, how do you say it's granted and the neighbors are really upset and they're noticing things and it's causing problems and there's safety issues and all those things, and then they come in and they complain, then how is the conditional use permit on a duplex revoked or rescinded? I mean, how's that enforced, I guess is my question.
Good question. So the conditional use permit runs with the land. So if this property changes, no matter who the owner is, the occupants could continue to go with that. If they're outside of their conditional use permit parameters, then we bring them into compliance. Once we set conditions, if they're abiding within those conditions, even perhaps there are unforeseen circumstances or issues that arise from that, we probably have to, outside the conditional use process, look at mitigating those. We've heard trash or other things, the unruly state of the property. We have other ordinances that can deal with that, and so I heard we could look into that notwithstanding this whole issue. But it's my understanding that once we set conditions, as long as they're within those, then they can continue that. If they start going outside of that, we simply need to bring them back in compliance with those conditions that run with that property. To lose a conditional use permit, essentially the use has to be ceased for a period of up to a year. So if one to modify a structure, it's difficult to track, but maybe an easy example would be if somebody was granted the ability to do an arcade downtown and the business left, the grocery store came for a year, well, the arcade's gone, and the next arcade that comes back would have to come back before the planning commission. But as long as this is continually used as the two-family dwelling, the structure exists in the state, it will probably continue to do that from here on without.
Even if they violated the conditions, is that what you're saying?
And if they continue to violate the specific conditions, perhaps I'm not addressing your question directly, that could be cause for revocation of that conditional use permit. So if they've not upheld to, again, just a recommendation that parking on site and that parking is removed, yes, they're then in violation and can come before the planning commission for consideration and revocation. So that's probably what the question was to begin with. But yes, if they go outside of what parameters you set, they'll be back here before you for consideration on whether that continues.
Okay. I guess I'm just asking because I'm wondering if it's something that we, as Josh described, kind of have to grant. The only control we can put on it is just the condition. I guess we can make really specific conditions. Is that what you're saying? And just make them.
If you can tie the conditions to reasonably anticipated issues, and we put the conditions on that property and they're not abiding by those, then they could come back and have that revoked. But again, my take on it is if you don't place a condition on it, and suddenly an issue happens, they're complying with everyone you set, but something new comes up, they're still within the parameters that were set for them on their conditional use permit.
Okay, so at this point, having, for example, say we tabled it or something and had the applicant come in and he talks about what he wants to do, it's really not appropriate then because, or would it be?
Yeah, it could be appropriate. So if you feel there are questions that you aren't able to answer or address that they would have additional information on or needed, that is your prerogative as a commission to
super generous, I suppose. If you want to come up and make a comment, yeah, we'll hear from you. Because there's not very many of you.
Issues that come with that. Are there conditions to address the safety issues, I guess is my question. Thank you.
I'll speak first off, Mr. Chair, to the distance question, I suppose. So the house itself is at least 20 feet from the property line. That's just a setback requirement for the zone. So the structure we know is at least that far. The width of the driveway it could be done in a number of ways. It could be a 20-foot wide driveway. They'd be welcome to pave right up to the fence, or so to speak, right up to the property line if they chose to. It could be more narrow. So you could have a 10-foot wide driveway in that stretch. Again, you park in tandem with the person behind another. That could be wide enough side by side. And again, to the frontage and the distance from the stop sign, simply just straight across from this home, it's 20 feet, and you can see that there would be distance from the stop sign to accommodate that. The driveway may curve. Technically, it's doable. It's whether or not it's preferred or beautiful and those types of things, but on a technical basis, yes, I believe they could fit a driveway for 2 cars.
So we can hear your recommendations, Lyle, predicated on 2 points. First one is parking, provide a minimum 2 parking stalls per unit in accordance with ACC 1732-5, no parking spaces required. And the second one is driveway approaching closer to 20 feet to the point with the property lines. We're at 650 East, and we're North Street per ordinance 32-2 on street parking. So you're saying right now it meets those conditions.
His drawing probably doesn't with the detail that it is, but the conditions placed in there would require that anything implemented does follow that.
Thank you. Go ahead.
In those conditions, is you have separate meters, separate utilities, separate heat, separate water, all those metering separate in the unit. As now, he has one air conditioner and one furnace for the entire unit. That's not allowing for separate utilities for the upstairs and downstairs. They also don't have separate water if one gets turned off. Something happens. The other tenant loses his functionality of utilities. Then the unit's unusable, no utilities because they've been turned off. How does he address not having utilities for up and down?
So before, whatever the plan commission determines tonight in a scenario where the conditional use permit is approved, before the actual change of occupancy can occur, they have to proceed through the building permit process to convert it from a single family to a 2-family occupancy in the dwelling. And that would require fire separation, utility separation, HVAC, vent system separation, egress, ingress requirements, and I probably can't name them all, but they would be required to go through a building permit process to do that. On the duplex, there are some provisions, but not every utility necessarily has to be separated. Many will. A twin home, the side-by-side, there's different zero-lot line type. There does have some distinct requirements that are unique to those. But hopefully that's at least to the point that, yeah, they would have to go through a building permit and get approval, be inspected, and verify that all those items meet international residential code is structured.
Was there one more comment?
This really is my favorite thing to do. There are 10 homes in the cul-de-sac. 8 of the homes are represented here, and he's not here.
So let me just offer some of my thoughts. Where do I start? Okay, so let me just give my thoughts on what, if this were approved, what would change. Like, so we're saying, again, I'll go back to what I said. If it's a conditional use permit, we're saying what are the detrimental impacts? In other words, what is changing? And can we address those by imposing conditions? So here are the things that I think are tax or not. And then I want to just offer my opinion on the things that we can't consider despite the validity of them. So what's changing is there's going to be two separate families or occupants in this one structure. What I'm hearing is there's not, at least according to the drawings we have and what I've heard from what I was saying, there's nothing that's really going to change necessarily from the outside of the building of the home, other than a driveway, and then there's going to be access around the back. And I looked at those pictures, it looks like there's already a stairwell there. So from the outside, aesthetically, it's just going to be a driveway, which means there will be more cars parked on there. Then that means more cars will be there, at least probably two. Certainly one, probably two, maybe more, but at least two, I think we would assume. And then that driveway is close to 200 North. That is a change, and that is an impact. I mean, me personally, I'm struggling to find what are the other detrimental impacts that I think we should address. So I'll address the property value, and I'll at least give my opinion, and we can maybe differ. So property value, and then other things related to it. So the rental aspect. So both with the conditional use permit and any other considerations, it's not our, at least in my opinion, it's not within our purview to say whether someone can rent or not. Sometimes renters, I agree, don't take care of the property. Sometimes they do. Maybe more likely they don't. It just depends. And we don't dictate necessarily as a city, and certainly in a conditional use permit, whether someone can rent their property out or not. Sometimes there's HOAs, and that's one of the beauties, if you want to look at that way, of an HOA. An HOA says, look, we're going to get together and we're going to try to manage property values in the way we see fit. We don't want renters in our HOA. That's one of the reasons why you have an HOA, because you get to control that kind of stuff. Many people think that's better made as a private decision and not a government decision. As a government, we don't decide what people can do in that way with their property. In a similar way, we don't also regulate in many ways aesthetics. So we don't say your house has to look a certain way. In some cities they do. In Kaysville, we don't do that very much. We might say the height, very, very few things. The cleanliness of the property, whether the grass is mowed. All of these things, in my opinion, we can have a philosophical discussion about, are not the role of government to dictate. They might be unsightly. We might not like them, and we might want them to change. But it's not the role of the government to dictate those types of things. It's certainly not, in my opinion, a conditional use application. Property value, so I'll just give you my thoughts on that. Property value, we're really talking about two different things, and we actually had someone come and speak to this as from the community come and speak to this several months ago. Property values are determined in two ways: appraised value and market value. Appraised value really only looks at comparable sales, recent sales. They say, okay, what other homes in this given vicinity have sold that are similar to this one? They have the same square footage or similar square footage, similar bedrooms, similar bath, similar age of home. What of those homes sold in a recent time frame and what price? And then they average those, aggregate those, and say, okay, this is the appraised value for this structure. That analysis, very little is given to the cleanliness of the property, or whether it's a rental or not, or something like that. Market value takes those things a little bit more into a home in the cul-de-sac is getting sold. A buyer, a prospective buyer who sets market value might not want to live with this duplex on the corner. I recognize that. I think that's totally subjective, and I think you might find a buyer who doesn't want to live there. You might find a buyer who says, I don't even care. I just love this house in this cul-de-sac so much, I want to live here. So those are the two ways that that property values are affected, and in my view, this doesn't have a drastic or maybe even arguably any impact on those two things. But again, those things are not necessarily impacts that we can impose conditions for. So I don't know that it's, again, within our discretion that I mentioned is very little to decide whether we can change it or impose a condition to affect those things. And then the last thing I'll say, and I'll let other people talk, is 200 North, right there, if you zoom in on that if you can, Lyle. We don't have pointers, but this is right where 200 North narrows and the full width of the right-of-way is not improved, okay? So just to the west, it's fully improved. In other words, the road is as wide as it's going to get on 200 North. Here, at some point in the future, from the location of this corner where this property is up to Highway 89, is going to be improved the full width of the right-of-way. There's going to be a road all the way, curb and gutters, park strip, sidewalk. That may happen in the near future with all the changes coming in at Highway 89, but right now it's not. Lyle mentioned we could decide whether we wanted to impose that as sort of a condition, but we'd have to decide whether there was a connection there between the impact and what we were imposing. So I think, the stop sign concern and the parking concerns are valid and maybe conditions that we should think about imposing. I have one more thing, but I'll let other people talk.
So the way I read this is the initial page, Plan Commission should consider the request based on the city standards for conditional use, review listed below 17-30-8 standards. When you look at all those points, the only thing that could be in question is number 1. I mean, unless anybody has, help me out, but it seems like all the other points are somewhat met by the vetting already, but that's possibly in question. I mean, if we're at that stage where we have to consider yay or nay, that's the only thing that we can do.
Okay, I have a question about imposing a requirement for them to put in a sidewalk. Now, the other properties on 200 North next door don't have sidewalk, right?
That's accurate. So across the street, the right-of-way is improved. To the west, the right-of-way is improved. But east of this, up until, and there's a church at about 7th East in the Simmons property. There's a big gap for several hundred feet at least with no sidewalk to the east.
Okay. So it would be unusual for us to put that type of requirement on this property or not? To address safety concerns, there'll be a little bit more traffic. I can see how that could be a busier area because obviously there are no cars there now as a driveway.
A weighted question. So unusual, I mean, we don't deal with these extremely frequently, so it's hard to say we've got a precedence of how often we've done it. I've not, through a conditional use process, may be wrong. I could think of a couple conditional uses we've done here in Kaysville on utility structures, gas pipeline station or something of that nature, where we've had them put in sidewalk and create a yard so that it looks compatible and similar to residences around it because they're putting those into neighborhoods. So I've seen sidewalk come out in those cases as they're improving.
The hand-drawn drawings that aren't very good, and I would just like to know, for example, how close the new driveway is to 200 North, what's it going to look like, and because I do think that potentially parking and the proximity of that drive to 200 North is a concern. So with what I've got, I'm left to assume some things, but I can't definitively say whether I like the way it's proposed. And so, my thought would be, it would be nice to have the applicant here to say, A, with a better drawing, more accurate to scale drawing, and B, you know, how can they, you know, what would they propose to address some conditions that we've identified? Will you just come up to the mic so that whether you guys knew it or not, we're being recorded, so you're all on TV, and we can hear you better.
One thing I just haven't heard much talk about, we've heard about the driveway and the stop sign. What about the fire hydrant? There's a fire hydrant right there. And it seems like, I don't know the measurements, I would love to, because it seems like that driveway would be almost on top of the fire hydrant. I just can't imagine that safe. I'm just curious. I don't know the actual measurement.
That's a good point. I appreciate that. And then my thought would be if we're asking the applicant to come back with a more refined proposal, what are they going to do with that fire hydrant? Or do we need to do anything? Because right now it's in the right of way. But, you know, we need to maybe get better information on those questions.
On the last vote, if you could bring that back up. They've tried this before, and I want to point this out. Even if he wants to put in a driveway, and he goes along this burn right here that you put in some years ago, this is what my property repeatedly water came down this hill, across the previous owner, flooded my house. Now, when its sprinklers break, my house floods. I'm going to have to put in a wall between our house and just, you know, that's nothing here or there. But a condition when you brought a driveway in here, how are you going to keep the water out? The sea going to keep these yards from flooding? There was a problem before when you got to put this burn in. Now I can see you putting in, widening the street, raising the street, and putting in your conduit. But again, all of this will change how much this driveway is being sold, even if you try to come in the back.
So I want to join the party and point at the thing over here. So, okay, so actually zoom in a little bit, Lyle. So we can go back to this drawing, not yet. So this drawing you can see in the back with the lot lines. We have an imaginary lot line on this drawing. It's like right here. Okay, just beyond the stop sign is the edge of the right of way. In other words, this is how property lines and right of way work. So picture this sidewalk and this park strip and this curb and gutter over on 200 North. The property line, the imaginary line, sit a foot behind the sidewalk. So eventually, 200 North is going to get built out. There's going to be a curb, a park strip, a sidewalk, and that property line is going to sit 1 foot behind the back of the sidewalk. That'll be like right in here. So all of this is going to be 200 North. And it looks like, and more dimensions there is my point. I mean, that's a question at this point. And then once 200 North comes in, that should solve your problem because it'll direct all the water off 200 North to a different place, not your property. But for now, I want to have more information about those things before we say what conditions are necessary to impose.
Yeah, so to Kevin's point, that goes to, I guess, number 10, provide for water runoff.
That is something that we can address, and we should address, actually.
There's a fire hydrant on the property. The city's taking care of that. There's plenty of fire capacity.
So, does it sound like we're ready for a motion?
I'll make a motion to table the conditional use permit for two-family dwelling at 188 North, 650 East for Dustin Parker, so that he can come and speak to us and give us a little bit more detail about what he's planning. And that's it. Not an engineered plan, right? you want to?
scale.
Okay.
You can hand draw it. but
Okay.
it has to be scaled.
Okay. Yeah, we'd like him to come back with a 2-scale drawing with detail, elevation detail. So an engineered drawing, basically.
I don't know if that has, you can put engineered if you want. I don't know if it has to be engineered. It just has to have correct dimensions and with relative to everything else out there. And then if I could maybe throw something in there, have the applicant be prepared to talk about these criteria that are in the staff report that are also in the ordinance. I mean, that would be a suggestion.
Okay. Make a motion to table the conditional use permit for a 2-story two-family dwelling at 188 North 650 East for Dustin Parker on the condition that he comes back and addresses 17-30-8 standards and brings a 2-scale plan so that we can see what he's wanting to do with the property.
I will second that.
Aye.
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 So just to clarify what that means, this is going to come back, and you will, Lyle, correct me if I'm wrong, you'll get notice that it's going to come back, and then you can come back and see and hear what the applicant has to say and offer your comments. I'm not the normal chairperson. I think Wilf, the regular chairperson, is generous too, so he'll probably let you talk. But that's what basically we just decided. Okay. So we will move on to the next agenda item, and that is now officially the preliminary plat for the Green Manor subdivision with a public hearing. Lyle.
Thank you, Commissioner. So you may recall recently the Planning Commission was looking at this property and made recommendation to the City Council under a rezone consideration. We had a development agreement together with the rezone and proposal at this property that's directly west of the Smith's Marketplace on the north side of 200 North. From that, and this is the plan that was shown at that time and as part of the actual agreement, we've seen multiple revisions as this has gone through the process, and ultimately it ended up in a single-family detached housing development with up to 21 units permitted. It's on a private street type scenario. You can see that it loops in across from Mountain Vistas with the street access. It too has a similar island median on that you can see in the plans as we'll go through those. And anyway, the one point of entry, but it's circular around it, so for fire access and things, our fire chief has felt that would be sufficient for their needs to get in and out. It includes an access to the trail to the north. The developer may talk a little bit more about some of the fencing and other items. And the roadway itself also, originally some property to the north was considered as part of the application. We've revised that a lot over time. So it's no longer included with the development. However, the road essentially abuts the adjacent property to the north, so it does provide the opportunity for access to that in the future should they choose to develop. So you can see the landscape plan here showing you've got the open spaces up near the trail. There are a couple of larger pockets. They keep an open area or a common area up against 200 North so they can create a nice landscape fill and element. You can see the type of fencing and the signage that would be proposed. It's been placed outside of a Vision 8 triangle so that it's not going to impede traffic. And where it sits in relation to the Tesoro pipeline essentially becomes open space or flat work, keeps the structures outside of that, as was discussed more in the rezone process. So here's the plat itself that accommodates that. You can see some of the topography and site plan a lot of similar things. Here's the type of architecture that's been proposed for your interest. So you can see the single-family detached. The developer can speak to more what's inside these homes, but the character and nature, what you would see here. Within the plat, what I'll call out here, and within the development agreement, there are some provisions for some smaller setback requirements. So the garage going to get this wrong, it can be as close as 18 feet to the front property line, but it allows for a front porch to go a little bit closer. So typically that makes a little bit more aesthetic, so the garage door is not so front and present in a tight space, and a more traditional home style look. And so that was the request for that. Again, that's in compliance with what was brought up through the rezone process. As staff review this, again, it's a preliminary level, so there's engineering and other items still to be figured out the specific detail, but our utility providers and others feel that, yeah, the can be serviced. There are ways to do it. Sewage was a question through the rezone process and whether or not that would be able to be accommodated. They've shown options of actually separating the sewage so they can carry some of it to one line to the north near the Smith's Marketplace building. The rest could go south into other lines. So our districts told us those are viable options. There's work to be done with crossing to get to those. So we'll have to work through that before we see a final plat. Dealing with stormwater, they've provided options as well and intentions as well as preliminary calculations on how they would manage that on the site with the proposed development. So we're ready as staff to recommend to the Planning Commission that they forward the council a positive recommendation on this one. And again, at preliminary plat, they have the final say, but we're looking this evening for your recommendation. The developer is hung tight here as well as, and so has additional information for you. I'm happy to answer any questions as well, and would remind you that we would also seek public input on this one to the chair. So with that, I'll return it to you, Mr. Chair. And
Thank you. So we can give the applicant, Mr. Holland, would you like to speak to this?
Phil Holland, does it even work? I can't tell.
I think it's on, yeah.
1082 West, Dutch Lane, Kaysville. And I, more than anything, am here just to make sure to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you. So we do have a public hearing for this, so we will open it for the public hearing. If there's anyone here that wants to speak to this, now is the time. Okay, no one's taking the opportunity, so we will close the public hearing and open it up for discussion amongst the commission.
So, Lyle, my only thought is I've noticed this multiple times, is that where you have that trail that crosses over 200 North, oftentimes access, the right in, right out, and turn access into the Smiths gets very congested mornings and nights. We're adding more traffic coming into this development. Is the city looking, and this is just my question, is the city looking at some mitigation there and looking at some access points? I know that trail is heavily used, and then also with the traffic coming in on that side, my concerns are just simply with the traffic now coming and exiting from this development, what's going to be done, because you have now bikes and pedestrians coming across there with traffic that then comes through with the businesses there and coming in and out of the Smiths. What's being done on the traffic?
Yeah, so that we've currently got personnel looking at options as we speak. A lot of this came up of timing-wise. I guess a few of the commissioners wouldn't have been a part of it, but kitty corner to this, there's a property that was recently rezoned for commercial use with the Ogden Clinic, and you may recall some of that. And we discussed that heavily with that application, and so that's triggered some process with the city where, to your point, trying to improve safety and then some considerations there right at that trail crossing. So some of the items that are being looked at are, right now it's a flashing yellow. To switch that over to a true hawk signal with red to just make it more simple for people to know, putting in stop bars, restriping, dealing with some of the visibility on the street. So I don't know everything that's going to come out of it, but we've got engineers that are taking a look at that to see if we can get some improvements made at that specific location based on very similar concerns that we've been hearing.
To that point, I was wondering, is there any way to, and you're working on this, I guess, to force traffic to turn only one direction, so that, I know over in Layton, for example, on Hillfield Road, if you're over by Walmart and you're trying to go east, you have to go all the way up and then turn around, which is a pain, but I think it helps with traffic. I've been meaning to ask you that anyway, on 200 North.
Yeah, I'll pass that along. I don't know if you're directing that specifically with this application, but absolutely center medians and other ways we could limit left turn movements and do right in, right out, or different alternatives to that. I know, for example, with the Ogden Clinic property, they were very specific that they need at least one two-way out, left turn, right turn movement out of it. So that one, you know, get a little separate from this application, but just speaking with this area, they were showing a driveway just on the east side of the trail, but then they had an alternate exit on that one where maybe the two-turn movements were appropriate and one side it wasn't. Here, where it's the only way in and out, perhaps that's appropriate. Our emergency services haven't seemed too concerned based on the distance and engineering looking at the preliminary. We like them lined up across from Mountain Vistas to create more of a typical intersection that actually helps some of that movement. I've not, at least from those who have reviewed it to this point, have been indicated to that we need to limit movements in or out of this particular development.
Okay, thanks. I was just one more thing. Okay, I was just going to say I really like this development. I think that the developer and the seller, they've done a great job in terms of reaching out to the neighbors. I think it looks great. I think it's an appropriate use for this area, and I think it'll be a great it'll be a great contribution to Kaysville. I think it's a good project.
I was just going to comment on the entrance or the traffic flow, I suppose, in and out of this. I mean, to me, it's no different than directly across the street, Mountain Vistas. It looks just like that, and so it's going to have the same impact. I mean, there's probably an argument to be made that it might add a little more congestion because they're lining up, but on the other hand, that's how it should be. Yeah, I mean, I'll echo what Tammy just said about just the project in general, because if we remember what this looked like when it started, I think it was a lot more dense, and if you all remember, I think I was in favor of it at that point, so I think I'm going to be in favor of it at this point. But the time for that is past. Now we're just saying, does it meet the development agreement, which I think the answer is yes. Does it meet the other requirements? And from what I think Lyle's saying and the staff report is saying, the plat complies. So if there's no other discussion or comments, maybe entertain a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the preliminary plat for the Green Manor subdivision.
So we are recommending approval to the council.
I'd like to recommend to approve the preliminary to the city council the preliminary plat for the Green Manor subdivision.
Is there a second? Okay, we have a second. Let's start with you again, Tammy. Aye.
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 Okay. Let's see. So, next item is a call to the public. Anyone who's still here and not leaving can come speak to us.
Before I begin, Michael Halls, 75 South. Just checking on the Harvey Estates. Do we have an idea of when that's coming up for final plat?
We've received the application and documents for final plat review. We've been working with it. It's possible that it's on the upcoming agenda. I think October the 10th is the next meeting date.
Is that the Ovation development that we're talking about? Okay.
Correct. Just a couple of things that I found working with the Historic Preservation Committee and the Farmington Kaysville Museum type of a thing. Last time I talked to you guys, I said the building was built in 1899. They have corrected me. It's actually 1875. It was the third...
What about the bricks? Were you right on the bricks?
I was right on the bricks.
Okay.
They said it was a Kaysville brickyard, but in 1875, there was only one brickyard in Farmington, Fruit Heights, and Kaysville. So it was called the Kaysville brickyard until 1890 something, when the actual Kaysville brickyard started. So anyway, it was the actual third building in the schoolhouse in Kaysville, and I think the only one that's still standing. If you actually drive by it, you can see there was an actual west entrance on it where they actually have a little arch where the school bell resided. They put the front doors on it a little bit later when they converted it into a home. And you guys know about this, but a couple of things that has just been interesting as going through this process is one of them is, just talking, the Historic Commission Preservation Committee is kind of talking to the developer, and everybody wants to make this work, right? Once this gets torn down, it'll never be built back again. And the ground underneath it is grass, is never going to be anything other than grass. The building, if you were to convert it into storage for the community, would have $600 a month of economic value, just if you were to look at comparable storage rates. If you were to look at other alternate uses, the building could serve as a telecommunication hub if something in the city council were to be approved. And other uses in the future, the active transportation plan puts a lot of foot traffic in front of that. As Legacy goes into place and we have a bike and walking path that will connect between the Legacy Trail and the rail trails, you'll get a lot of actual people walking in front of that. And for no other reason than just it's much more interesting to walk in front of something that is a historic building than it is to walk in front of another subdivision piece of grass and trees. There's also potential in the future that may be small commercial use for that building. The sad part is as I talk to all of the different entities that are involved, everybody kind of was pointing their finger at everybody else saying, well, this isn't really our bailiwick, right? This is not our area. There's no real strong leadership. There's a plucky historic preservation committee that's trying their best to figure out how to actually make this work, but the city's laws and ordinances and the way that things work are structured do not facilitate it. We don't have, for example, a place for conservation easements, where the developer could donate an easement on the property and get a tax break for that. It's just not actually set up to do that. We don't have necessarily, it isn't captured in the general plan about incentives and reasons and giving the land use authorities the ability to encourage the use of historic properties while preserving property rights. At the same time, the Public Parks Department maintains a large amount of properties, but doesn't necessarily have anything set up for historic buildings. To maintain this building, obviously there's a lot of deferred maintenance, and whether or not that's worth it for this building is a question. But going forward, it's been up for 100 years. I can guarantee you the spend is pretty modest on that particular structure. But there's no way to actually estimate what those things are or work with the developers to figure that out, so that the City Council, the Planning Commission, the Historic Preservation Commission, all of them have the information necessary to understand what is possible. And I think that that's really a disappointment. And from an outsider's perspective, having watched these meetings, I can say it's kind of like therapy. And while I'm very grateful because I've been in the therapy seat, from a while and listening to the Planning Commission walk through the process, I don't think it gives the Planning Commission the ability to adopt or think deeply about things like this. And the general plan was written probably 30 years ago. It's incrementally updated over time. But, we're talking about some things that are really going to change, and I think the Planning Commission needs time that is dedicated to meetings that are more strategic in scope. And it's great. I'd love to be engaged and stuff like that, but, and I'm sure there are other people in the community that want to, but sitting through 3 hours of the therapy makes it fairly difficult to stay engaged over the long term. anyway, so I just hope you guys, when you see this coming up before the commission, that you think about these. You know, if we can't make it work for this building, honestly, we can't make it work for anything else. There's no better use case here for something where to preserve a structure than anything that's coming down the road. So good luck and thank you.
And again, thank you for coming down here and taking such a great interest. You mentioned earlier, I don't know if these were two separate things, but obviously the historical district, and then use development dwelling for moderate income housing. Were those two separate issues, or were you talking about combined?
No, I think in a lot of cases our historical properties are a little bit unique in the structure because a lot of times they were built with a very small historical home at front, right, with a larger lot in the back, and that usually was housing horses and other types of things. Those properties are kind of a unique opportunity for redevelopment because the home in the front a lot of times could be potentially moderate income if you would allow a more flexible use along the back of the property. Kind of the inverse of the accessory dwelling unit. The back of the property effectively becomes, a flag lot or something else like that. Especially when you've got multiple homes combined, there's a possibility of combining some of that property and giving some unique access in other areas to kind of support that. And I think one of the challenges that SB 34 is going to create is it is almost going to incentivize the creation of undesirable neighborhoods, right? Areas where effectively you just keep them in a perpetual state of disrepair because that's how you keep people from wanting to pay more money for the property. And I think in order to really kind of make the moderate income affordable, you have to find a way to make it desirable, but an accessory to people who are willing to basically keep the properties and maintain them and invest in the future.
Thank you.
Just a quick question. Have you worked with the SHPO office down in Salt Lake for looking for grants for preservation?
No. The Historical Preservation Committee has reached out to some various partners, Preservation Utah, to kind of understand what some of the options are. Given the committee was only formed like 6 weeks ago, I mean, they're still getting their feet under them. One thing that I do have a question on is in some of the articles, obviously there's a historic building on it, but there were also archaeological finds in terms of grinding stones and other stuff. But I don't know if that Utah State Historical Preservation and Archaeology Ordinances apply because it is only concerned with state fund distributions, and the roads are somewhat funded by the state.
Can I have a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I just did a SHPO agreement with the state for the county for the program that I maintain with the county. And so any time there's a ground disturbance in the city, you're supposed to have that in place if there's a historical preservation group. So the State Historical Preservation Office would be very interested. There's also monies there to preserve. So having worked with the governor's office before in the economic development side, they would come with us when we go out and do road tours in the counties. And these are the kind of projects they look for in the counties because they want to preserve that history, because if you don't, then the buildings get raised and you look back and all you have is pictures instead of the actual building. And so Green River is a great example where they've done that. Down in Emery County, they've done some of these projects where they're preserving these buildings that have the local architecture, local flavor, because if you don't learn about how the buildings were built and how the people lived at the time. And so I think it's important to start looking for that. There's a grant program and a grant process for this, but also it's important to get involved, and I'll point this to you, Lyle, and you and I can talk offline later, but to get involved and get a historical preservation agreement in place with them, because anytime you're doing any kind of ground disturbance, you want to make sure you're protecting that.
And I think that's the most critical piece is as long as the agreement's in place, then all of a sudden we have a lot of time to be able to look about funding and fundraising and other stuff. Right now it's a little bit of a challenge. So
in particular where we date back with Pioneer Legacy, you get 3 different trails that come through Utah, and there is funding there for that.
And we'll appreciate the conversation. As we continue to work with the developer, we'll bring this up, and I think there are probably scenarios, as Mr. Halls has stated, I don't think they have any issue with preservation in some fashion. I think there are concerns on the cost, is what it comes down to it. So timing, that's a big piece of it. If I'm remembering everything correctly in the top of my head, it's probably not in the way where it can't sit for a while if we allowed other work and things. So there are probably a lot of items on the thing we can discuss, and we'll be happy to bring that up. I know that, just has been stated, they've started those conversations with the Historic Preservation Committee, so we'll see where that pulls into play and what could be done.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to the almost last item, reports, correspondence, calendar.
Yeah, so I have just probably very little here, but next meeting, again, I think October the 10th is, I'll double check at the date, so the second meeting, second Thursday in October. We're going to be back with the general plan on that one, and the second meeting as well. Currently, I think we're with 6 commissioners. I think the mayor's still deciding a process for filling Commissioner Anderson's seat. So, as he mentioned last time, he's completed. I've not heard any news from him, but hopefully things are going well for his family. So, if or when you do have conflicts, and you're always very good about it, but continue to let us know. It is required that we have at least 4 for a quorum to conduct business, and not to put too much pressure, but until we have at least a 7th person, then your attendance becomes even more critical. So, and we'll keep you posted on that process. If you know people in the community that you think would be beneficial to participate on the commission, have them reach out. I don't know if the mayor's starting an official application process or the timing on that has been done in the past, but certainly they could reach out to our office or the mayor, and if you are aware of anybody you think would be a benefit to this body. Otherwise, unless there's direction or items from you that you'd like to give to me, that's my correspondence.
Anything else? Motion to adjourn? The head nods are telling. Okay. Let's adjourn.